Today we gather at a moment that history itself will mark with bold letters. September 25th, a day now remembered as the eruption that shattered assumptions, disrupted balances, and redefined the very course of Middle Eastern politics. 25 September eruption, Arabs declare war. Israel's collapse begins. It is not simply a headline. It is the chilling echo of long-suppressed tensions finally exploding onto the global stage. And we must ask, how did we get here? Why now? And what does this mean for all of us far beyond the immediate battlefield? The announcement of unprecedented Arab unity on September 25th sent shockwaves through the political landscape, leaving observers stunned at how quickly a fractured region seemed to coalesce around a single shared objective. For decades, the Arab world has been defined not by unity, but by division, ideological rifts, competing national interests, and unresolved disputes have often paralyzed collective action. Yet this moment, this eruption, has revealed what many thought impossible: when pressure builds long enough and injustice festers deep enough, even the most divided actors can find common cause. And in this case, the cause is nothing less than war against Israel. The sudden solidarity is itself a political earthquake, one that carries implications far beyond the immediate battlefield, for it challenges the assumptions of global powers who long relied on Arab disunity as a stabilizing constant in the Middle East. The hook here is clear and powerful. When the weak unite, the strong are forced to question their strength. This is the lesson reverberating from Arab capitals tonight. The decision to set aside long-standing disputes, whether between monarchies and republics, secular regimes and Islamist movement, or wealthy Gulf states and struggling nations, signals a recognition that the moment is too critical for hesitation. It tells us that collective memory has finally overpowered present rivalries, and that the shared narrative of grievance against Israel has reached a boiling point. For decades, Arab leaders spoke of solidarity but acted in isolation. Now, with war declared, that rhetoric has become action, and it is this transition that makes the development historically significant. What makes this unity so shocking to the global audience is not only that it happened, but how swiftly it unfolded. Western analysts, accustomed to framing Arab states as perpetually divided, are now grappling with the reality that the fragmentation they relied upon can vanish under the right conditions. For Israel, this is a nightmare scenario. Fighting one adversary at a time is manageable, but confronting a coordinated bloc of nations creates the risk of strategic overextension. It exposes the limits of military dominance, reminding us that even the best armed states can falter when they must divide their attention across multiple fronts. And more importantly, it calls into question whether Israel's decades of leveraging Arab divisions to its advantage have now backfired, pushing these nations into alignment through shared frustration. This unity also speaks to a deeper undercurrent in regional politics: the recognition that symbolic gestures are no longer enough. Past decades were filled with summit declarations, fiery speeches, and temporary boycotts that rarely translated into lasting policy. But the eruption on September 25th demonstrates a willingness to convert sentiment into strategy. It is a collective statement that the era of fragmented resistance is over, and that future confrontations will no longer be waged in isolation. This has a profound psychological impact, not only on Israel but also on its Western allies, who now face the sobering reality that their policies of containment and mediation may no longer suffice. The economic and cultural dimensions of this unity are equally vital to consider. It is not merely a military alignment. It is a pooling of resources, a synchronization of narratives, and a shared readiness to bear the costs of conflict. Nations with vastly different economies are suddenly aligned in purpose, signaling that the pursuit of dignity, justice, and influence outweighs short-term concerns over financial stability. In a global system that often measures power in dollars and weapons, the Arab unity of September 25th reminds us of a more profound truth: shared conviction, when amplified across borders, can be more powerful than any balance sheet. That is why markets tremble, oil prices shift, and global investors take notice, because unity transforms grievances into leverage, and leverage into force. Perhaps the most striking feature of this new alignment is how it redefines the narrative of possibility. Only weeks ago, analysts might have dismissed such unity as fantasy. Yet in politics, the line between impossible and inevitable is always thinner than we think. The eruption has shown us that when grievances align with opportunity, alliances can form overnight, and when they do, they can alter the course of history. The Arab unity of September 25th is a warning flare to every power in the region and beyond. Do not underestimate the collective will of nations who feel ignored, marginalized, or suppressed. For in unity lies not only power, but the ability to reshape realities that once seemed immovable. Israel's vulnerability, long hidden behind the facade of technological superiority and unshakable alliances, has now been thrust into the global spotlight in ways few could have predicted. For decades, Israel projected itself as the region's unbreakable fortress, armed with the latest defense systems, shielded by its nuclear ambiguity, and bolstered by Western diplomatic and military guarantees. But the eruption of September 25th has cracked that image, exposing weaknesses that were always there but conveniently ignored. What makes this moment so compelling is not simply the military threat itself, but the revelation that power, when stretched too thin, becomes fragile. The supposed iron dome of invincibility has shown fissures, and once the world sees vulnerability in what was thought to be indestructible, perception itself becomes a weapon. The hook here is unmistakable. Strength is only convincing until it is tested. And now, Israel's strength is being tested on multiple fronts at once. A state accustomed to handling individual threats, whether from Gaza, Lebanon, or Syria, suddenly finds itself forced to respond to a coordinated surge of hostilities. The very doctrine that underpinned its survival, the ability to strike quickly and decisively, is being challenged by the sheer scale of simultaneous engagements. No matter how advanced the weapons, no matter how well trained the soldiers, no nation can indefinitely withstand the pressures of fighting everywhere at once. This is the trap of overextension, the same trap that history's greatest empires have fallen into, from Rome to Washington. What is equally destabilizing for Israel is that its vulnerability is not confined to military dimensions. Social fractures within its own borders magnify the external threats. Recent years have seen rising tensions between religious and secular communities, divisions over government reforms, and growing discontent among marginalized groups. When external wars erupt, internal fractures often widen, and the September 25th eruption risks turning Israel's domestic divisions into strategic liabilities. If citizens begin to question leadership, if trust erodes in the institutions designed to protect them, then the collapse is not simply at the border, but at the heart of the nation itself. Vulnerability here becomes multidimensional, military, political, and social. Western support, long seen as Israel's ultimate safety net, is also facing its own limits. Washington and its allies now face competing crises: Ukraine, tensions in Asia, economic instability at home, and must weigh the costs of once again pouring vast resources into another conflict. This forces Israel into a dangerous position. The realization that Western backing may not be as unconditional or as immediate as it once was. The September 25th eruption has shifted the burden from symbolic support to practical commitment, and the cracks begin to show when allies hesitate, delay, or question the long-term sustainability of their role. For Israel, this hesitation becomes another form of vulnerability, one that cannot be solved with weapons alone. The perception of weakness is perhaps more dangerous than weakness itself. In geopolitics, perception drives strategy, and enemies exploit it. Once Arab nations and non-state actors see that Israel can be pressured, that its defenses are not impenetrable, and that its allies are not guaranteed, the momentum of confrontation builds. Vulnerability breeds aggression, as adversaries rush to seize the moment before the balance of power shifts back. This is the cascading effect of perception. Once the myth of invincibility is broken, it cannot be easily restored. And this is what makes the September 25th eruption a turning point. It is not only about battles fought, but about narratives rewritten. Economically, vulnerability also reveals itself. War is expensive, and sustaining a multi-front conflict drains resources that no state, however wealthy or supported, can endlessly absorb. Markets respond with fear, currencies weaken, and the cost of maintaining both security and civilian needs grows unbearable. For Israel, already facing rising living costs and social discontent, this financial pressure adds another layer to its fragility. The collapse is not instantaneous, but the erosion is steady, and erosion, if left unchecked, is what brings down even the strongest walls. The deeper hook is this: Israel is not collapsing because it has no strength, but because its strength has limits, and those limits have now been revealed. The September 25th eruption is a reminder that no fortress is absolute, no shield eternal, and no power immune to the relentless pressures of history. Vulnerability, once hidden, is now on display, and once the world sees it, the story of dominance begins to unravel. The eruption of September 25th is not just a regional war, it is a global test. What began as an Arab declaration of war against Israel has swiftly drawn the gaze of every major power in the world, each calculating how this conflict alters the balance they have long sought to maintain. Washington watches with alarm, aware that its decades of military and financial support for Israel now face their most difficult trial. Moscow sees an opportunity to weaken American influence in the Middle East by positioning itself as an alternative partner for Arab states. Beijing, focused on energy security and trade stability, recognizes that any disruption in the region could reshape global markets in ways that might strengthen its leverage. This is why the eruption is more than a clash of armies. It is a recalibration of global power itself. The hook here is both obvious and unsettling. When a regional war begins to dictate the strategies of superpowers, it ceases to be regional at all. What we are witnessing is not merely a military confrontation, but a stage on which the global contest for dominance is being played out. Every drone strike, every missile launch, every diplomatic statement becomes a signal to the world of where alliances stand and how fragile they have become. For decades, The United States has treated the Middle East as a theater of its own influence, protecting allies, policing adversaries, and shaping outcomes. But the eruption of September 25th has revealed that this monopoly on influence is slipping, as rival powers see both weakness in Washington's position and opportunity in Arab unity. The European capitals, too, find themselves trapped in a dilemma. Europe depends heavily on Middle Eastern energy, yet it is also tied politically to Washington's position and militarily to NATO structures. The eruption places them in a position where hesitation becomes costly. Do they follow the American lead and risk deeper entanglement in a war that stretches their resources thin after Ukraine? Or do they pursue their own path, seeking to mediate in ways that distance them from Washington's traditional hardline stance? Every delay, every ambiguous statement from European leaders exposes the cracks in transatlantic solidarity, giving Arab nations leverage they have not had in decades. This is how a war in one region destabilizes the entire international order, by forcing great powers to reveal their true priorities. Washington's ability to simultaneously project power in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East is no longer unquestioned. The very fact that Moscow and Beijing see space to maneuver is proof that the old unipolar world is giving way to something more contested. The September 25th eruption is not only about Israel's struggle for survival, it is about America's struggle to maintain its grip on global leadership. And if that grip slips even slightly, the ripple effects will be felt from Brussels to Tokyo, from Caracas to Johannesburg. Markets themselves are already acting as silent participants in this drama. Oil prices spike as investors fear disruption in supply, currencies fluctuate as uncertainty grows, and global trade routes are scrutinized for vulnerabilities. Every economic tremor feeds back into politics, putting pressure on leaders who must answer to restless populations at home. Rising fuel costs in Europe, inflationary shocks in the United States, and energy insecurity in Asia all magnify the geopolitical consequences of the eruption. What began as an Arab-Israeli war has morphed into a global economic event, proving once again that wars are never confined to battlefields. They travel through pipelines, shipping lanes, and balance sheets. The perception of shifting power is perhaps the most dangerous element of all. Once global actors believe the United States can no longer guarantee outcomes in the Middle East, the incentive grows for them to act independently, to challenge assumptions, and to test boundaries. This is where escalation becomes not just possible but likely. The September 25th eruption is, in this sense, a live demonstration of multipolarity, where no single power dominates and every actor moves cautiously, aware that every decision reverberates globally. The deeper hook here is that history always accelerates at moments like this. Wars expose realities that peacetime obscures. For years, experts debated whether the world was shifting to multipolarity or clinging to American primacy. Now, the eruption has ended the debate. We are witnessing the unraveling of one order and the messy birth of another. And Israel's vulnerability is only the trigger. What unfolds from this moment forward is not only the fate of one nation or one region, but the restructuring of global power itself. The eruption of September 25th has already proven that wars are never confined to guns, borders, or military maneuvers. They ripple outward, reshaping economies, displacing populations, and destabilizing societies in ways that endure long after the smoke clears. What we are witnessing now is the beginning of an economic and humanitarian domino effect. one that does not stop at the borders of Israel or the Arab states, but cascades through global systems with consequences few can escape. The immediate images are dramatic: missiles in the sky, armies mobilizing, speeches filled with defiance. But the quieter realities unfolding beneath those images may prove far more devastating. Inflation, disrupted trade, oil price shocks, and waves of displaced families are already knocking on the world's door. The war may have started in the Middle East, but its aftershocks will be felt in grocery stores in Europe, gas stations in America, and refugee camps stretching across the Mediterranean. The hook here is powerful. The battlefield may be regional, but the costs are global. Energy markets provide the clearest example. Every time a missile strikes near a port or a pipeline, prices respond with volatility. For nations like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, energy becomes both a weapon and a bargaining chip, while for importers in Europe and Asia, the eruption translates into higher costs and economic strain. Families thousands of miles away, with no direct connection to the war, will feel it in rising heating bills, transportation costs, and the price of food. Wars remind us that globalization means vulnerability. A conflict in one region now destabilizes lives across the planet. The humanitarian domino is equally staggering. Israel itself faces internal displacement as border communities empty in fear of attacks, while Arab populations near conflict zones brace for retaliatory strikes. The sheer scale of potential refugee flows threatens to surpass anything seen in recent decades, putting immense pressure on neighboring states like Jordan, Egypt, and Lebanon, which already carry heavy burdens from earlier conflicts. These nations may find themselves overwhelmed by the influx, their own fragile economies strained, their domestic politics destabilized. From there, the ripple moves further outward, boats crossing into Europe, asylum applications surging, debates reigniting over migration policy, and political tensions deepening between governments and their citizens. A war that begins with armies soon becomes a crisis for civilians across continents. At the same time, the financial burden of war itself cannot be ignored. Israel, despite its strong economy, cannot fight indefinitely without draining its coffers. Defense spending will soar, while social spending at home shrinks, aggravating tensions in an already divided society. Arab nations, too, will be forced to divert resources from development projects, infrastructure, and social welfare to military campaigns. For wealthy states, this means slowed progress. For poorer states, it means increased vulnerability, debt, and instability. The eruption threatens to lock entire nations into cycles of stagnation, where growth gives way to survival and opportunity gives way to desperation. The global south, too, finds itself caught in the domino effect. Many African and Asian nations are heavily dependent on Middle Eastern trade and energy, and any disruption sends their fragile economies into chaos. Rising costs for fertilizers, grains, and fuel may tip vulnerable regions into food crisis, sparking unrest that spreads far beyond the Middle East. The irony of war is that those who never fire a bullet often pay the heaviest price. September 25th is already proving this truth. Yet what makes this moment particularly dangerous is the way economic strain and humanitarian crisis feed one another. Rising costs create unrest at home. Unrest fuels political instability, and instability opens doors for extremism, violence, and further conflict. Refugees who are denied support or scapegoated in host countries become symbols of deeper divides, while impoverished communities may turn to desperate measures just to survive. The dominoes do not fall in isolation. They accelerate one another, creating a storm that no single nation can fully control. The deeper hook is that the September 25th eruption is not only a war, it is a stress test of the global system. It forces us to see how fragile our interconnected world truly is, how easily trade routes, energy supplies, and humanitarian structures can be overwhelmed by sudden conflict. Every war has costs, but this one reveals how those costs have no borders. A declaration of war in the Middle East has set in motion a chain reaction that now stretches across oceans and continents. A reminder that in our time, no nation can afford the illusion of distance. So as we close, let me leave you with this thought. History does not whisper politely. It shouts through eruptions. The Arab declaration of war and the tremors shaking Israel mark not only a geopolitical event but a lesson for all powers. Ignore the cries of justice at your peril. Today's eruption is tomorrow's reckoning. The real question before us is this: will the world hear the lesson and seek a new path forward? Or will it continue to repeat the cycles of arrogance, collapse, and renewal that have defined human history for centuries? Thank you.